The galaxy didn't panic when humanity built warships. It panicked when humans stayed calm after war was declared. The Senate Chamber of Concord floated above the storm-covered world of Helios Prime like a blade suspended in the dark. Miles of silver alloy curved beneath its foundations while electric clouds rolled far below the transparent lower decks, flashes of blue lightning illuminating the endless machinery that kept the station alive. Inside the chamber, thousands of representatives from more than 80 star systems sat beneath towering holographic banners that shimmered in crimson and gold. The air smelled faintly of ozone, hot circuitry, and polished metal. Translation drones drifted silently overhead like silver insects, their blue optical sensors flickering as dozens of languages echoed across the immense hall. Every seat was occupied, every eye fixed on the central podium where Supreme General Kareth of the Varkal Empire stood motionless beneath the harsh white lights. At nearly 8 feet tall, the Varkal commander looked carved from volcanic stone. His armor carried the deep red sheen of heated iron, layered with ceremonial black plating etched in old military victories. A long scar crossed one side of his jawline, pale against his dark crimson skin. Behind him, holographic war maps rotated slowly through the air, displaying the outer colonies of the Terran Union in cold blue light. Entire fleets blinked along strategic routes like hunting animals surrounding prey. The chamber had gone completely silent now. No whispers, no movement. Only the low mechanical hum of the station's gravity engines vibrating through the floor beneath everyone's feet. Kareth's yellow eyes narrowed as he activated the central broadcast field. His voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. By unanimous decree of the Varkal High Throne, the Terran Union is hereby declared a destabilizing force against galactic order. Massive holograms ignited above the Senate floor. Varkal warships appeared one after another in precise military formation. Hundreds of them. Their black hulls stretched across the projection like moving cities. Several alien delegates shifted, nervously in their seats. Others lowered their eyes entirely. Nobody wanted to be associated with humanity once the Varkal Empire made its decision. Kareth continued without emotion. All Terran-controlled trade routes will be seized immediately. Military compliance protocols begin at 1300 station standard. Another silence followed. Heavy, suffocating. Then the cameras turned toward the Terran delegation table. That was when the confusion began. Human Ambassador Ethan Cole sat alone beneath the blue and silver emblem of Earth. No security escort. No military officers. No visible panic. Just one middle-aged man calmly eating lunch. A ceramic plate rested in front of him beside a half-finished glass of iced tea. Steam still curled from the grilled steak he had been cutting with careful precision moments before the declaration of war. Ethan Cole looked completely unimpressed. The overhead lights reflected softly across his dark charcoal suit, while the silver streaks in his brown hair caught faint glimmers from the holograms above. He looked less like the representative of a threatened civilization and more like a tired businessman delayed at an airport restaurant. Around the chamber, whispers finally started spreading. Several delegates exchanged nervous glances. One of the smaller insectoid ambassadors leaned toward another and muttered something rapidly into a translator implant. Kareth stared directly at Ethan now, waiting, expecting fear, expecting outrage, expecting anything. Ethan slowly finished chewing his bite of steak. He dabbed the corner of his mouth with a cloth napkin. Then he glanced up at the enormous war projection floating over the Senate floor. "That's a lot of ships," he said casually. A few uncomfortable laughs escaped from distant seating rows before quickly dying out. Kareth's expression hardened. Humanity has 1 hour to submit all military assets to Varkal Command Authority. Ethan picked up his glass of iced tea and took a slow sip. Ice clinked softly against the side of the glass. Somewhere across the chamber, a translator drone emitted a faint electronic chirp while processing the silence. Then Ethan asked the question that would later appear in every major news archive across the galaxy. "Now," he said calmly, "or after lunch?" For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Even the drones seemed frozen in the air. Then the entire Senate chamber erupted into overlapping voices. The noise inside the Senate chamber spread like a shockwave through water. Hundreds of overlapping voices collided beneath the massive domed ceiling, while holographic banners flickered in unstable patterns overhead. Several delegates rose from their seats at once, their translators struggling to process the sudden flood of different languages. Some looked outraged. Others looked genuinely confused, but a few looked afraid. Ethan Cole noticed those ones immediately. Fear always moved quieter than anger. Supreme General Kareth remained perfectly still at the center podium, although the muscles near his jaw had tightened slightly beneath his crimson skin. The Varkle commander was not accustomed to resistance, especially not casual resistance. His yellow eyes locked onto Ethan across the chamber. "Do humans mistake this for humor?" he asked coldly. Ethan lowered his fork onto the edge of the ceramic plate with a soft click. "No," he replied. "Humans usually joke when they are nervous." Another uneasy silence drifted across the Senate floor. Somewhere high above, one of the translation drones emitted a brief pulse of static before recalibrating its audio filters. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair and adjusted the sleeve of his charcoal suit. His movements remained slow, controlled, deliberate, the kind of movements soldiers recognized immediately. Across the chamber, a female delegate seated near the outer diplomatic ring quietly straightened in her seat. Commander Lyra Vane of the Thalary Combine had spent nearly 12 years studying Terran military psychology during border negotiations along the Perseus Corridor. She had read thousands of classified reports involving human behavioral responses during crises. What frightened her now was not Ethan Cole's confidence. It was his complete lack of urgency. Her violet eyes narrowed as she watched him cut another piece of steak like the entire chamber was, discussing weather patterns instead of interstellar war. "Something is wrong," she whispered. The older diplomat seated beside her turned one of his silver mechanical eyes toward her. "With the human?" Lyra did not answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on Ethan. "No," she said softly. "With everyone else." At the central podium, Kareth activated another tactical projection. The chamber darkened slightly as entire sectors of Terran space illuminated in red. Supply routes, lunar stations, outer colonies. Every target surrounded with cold military precision. "The Varkle Empire possesses 6,000 active war vessels," Kareth announced. "Earth possesses barely one-third of that number." Ethan nodded faintly, as if reviewing quarterly business reports. "That sounds expensive." Several senators visibly recoiled at the response. Kareth's voice sharpened. "Your species does not understand the scale of what stands before you." Ethan finally looked directly at him. Calm gray eyes. No anger. No panic. Just exhaustion mixed with something older. "General," he said quietly, "humanity understands war better than most species in this room wish we did." The chamber grew still again. Lyra felt a strange chill move through her spine. She had heard that tone before while studying archived recordings from old human conflicts. It was the tone humans used when discussing history they regretted surviving. Ethan reached for his glass again, the ice shifting softly inside it. "You know the interesting thing about humans?" he continued. "Every century somebody decides we are too emotional to survive." He took another sip. "Then we survive anyway." Kareth stepped forward slightly. The floor beneath his armored boots vibrated with controlled force. "This is your final warning." Ethan glanced at the holographic warships above them. Thousands of black hulls drifting silently through projection space. Then he looked back down at the cooling steak on his plate. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I skipped breakfast for this meeting." A few nervous laughs escaped from distant seating rows before instantly disappearing again. Lyra did not laugh, because she finally understood what the others were missing. Ethan Cole was not trying to intimidate anyone. He genuinely was not worried. And somehow that was far more terrifying. The atmosphere inside the Senate chamber had changed in a way no technology could measure. The temperature remained perfectly regulated at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The gravity engines continued their steady vibration beneath the silver floors. The overhead lights still cast the same sterile white glow across polished metal walls and towering diplomatic banners. But fear had entered the room anyway, quietly, like smoke slipping beneath a locked door. Commander Lyra Vane could feel it spreading through the delegates around her. Conversations had become shorter now, more careful. Several senators kept glancing toward the human table when they thought nobody noticed. One of the merchant princes from the Orion Trade Coalition had already activated a private emergency channel beneath his desk. Another delegate from the Valoran Republic was visibly shaking while pretending to study military projections floating overhead. None of them understood why they were nervous. Lyra did. Humans frighten civilizations for the same reason deep oceans frighten children. Nobody ever knew how far the darkness actually went. Ethan Cole sat alone beneath the Terran emblem with the patience of a man waiting for delayed transportation. The steak on his plate had cooled completely by now, But he continued eating in small measured bites, while Supreme General Kareth outlined planetary seizure procedures across half the galaxy. The contrast was becoming unbearable. Kareth finally deactivated the tactical display with a sharp gesture. The red holograms vanished instantly, plunging the chamber into softer blue lighting again. Perhaps, the Varkle commander said slowly, humanity does not grasp the seriousness of extinction. Ethan placed his utensils neatly beside the plate. Humanity invented extinction events, he replied. Several translator drones hesitated for nearly half a second before processing the statement. That delay alone caused another wave of uneasy whispers. Kareth stepped down from the central platform now, his heavy armored boots echoing across the polished Senate floor as he approached the Terran delegation directly. Two Varkle guards followed several feet behind him, their black helmets reflecting the chamber lights like dark mirrors. The closer Kareth moved toward Ethan, the more obvious the size difference became. Ethan Cole stood just over 6 feet tall. Kareth towered nearly 2 feet above him with enough mass to intimidate almost any species in the known systems. But Ethan did not rise from his chair. He barely even looked up. You are either very brave, Kareth said, or catastrophically foolish. Ethan reached for his iced tea again. Those are usually the same thing where I come from. Somewhere across the chamber, somebody laughed nervously before immediately falling silent again. Lyra rubbed her fingers slowly against the smooth silver edge of her data tablet. Her instincts were screaming now. Not military instincts. Historical ones. She remembered studying old human documentaries years ago during diplomatic training. Grainy footage of exhausted soldiers drinking coffee beside damaged tanks. Emergency responders cracking jokes during hurricanes. Astronauts smiling calmly while sitting on rockets loaded with enough fuel to vaporize entire launch facilities. Human beings had a terrifying relationship with danger. The closer disaster moved toward them, the calmer some of them became. Lyra suddenly stood from her seat. The movement drew several surprised glances from nearby delegates. She ignored them completely and activated a private diplomatic channel through her wrist console. Access restricted Terran military archives, she whispered. The console flashed yellow. Access denied. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Override authorization, Vein 79. A long pause followed while encrypted systems processed her credentials. Then a single classified file appeared across the small holographic display. Titan Retaliation Protocol. Her pulse quickened immediately. The file carried Omega-level restrictions. Only wartime observers and top military analysts were allowed access. Slowly, she opened the archive. The first image that appeared was a younger version of Ethan Cole standing beside a destroyed orbital carrier while snow drifted silently around him. Below the photograph, one line of text glowed softly across the screen. If Ethan Cole remains calm during a declaration of war, Earth has already prepared its response. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. Across the chamber, Ethan finally glanced in her direction for the first time. Their eyes met briefly through the sea of frightened delegates. And somehow, impossibly, the human ambassador looked almost apologetic. The realization hit Commander Lyra Vane harder than any battlefield report she had ever read. Around her, the Senate chamber still buzzed with scattered arguments and diplomatic outrage, but the sounds felt distant now, muffled beneath the weight of the classified file hovering inches above her wrist console. The image of Ethan Cole standing beside the ruined orbital carrier remained frozen on the tiny hologram. Snow falling around him, gray smoke rising into a pale sky. His expression calm even then. Especially then. Lyra closed the archive immediately before anyone nearby could glimpse the Omega-level markings. Her pulse refused to slow down. Across the chamber floor, Supreme General Kareth remained focused entirely on intimidation. That was his mistake. He still believed fear moved in straight lines. Bigger fleet, bigger threats, bigger displays of force. But humans had evolved beneath pressures most galactic civilizations would never willingly survive. Environmental collapse, resource wars, nuclear standoffs, entire centuries balanced on the edge of self-destruction. Humanity did not fear pressure the same way other species did. Sometimes pressure simply made them quieter. Ethan finally pushed his plate slightly away from him and stood for the first time since the declaration began. The movement instantly pulled every eye in the chamber toward him. He adjusted the cuff of his charcoal sleeve with practiced precision before glancing toward the massive transparent wall overlooking Helios Prime below. Lightning rolled beneath the station again, illuminating layers of black storm clouds thousands of feet beneath the Senate structure. "General," Ethan said calmly, "have you ever studied human history?" Kareth folded his massive arms behind his back. "I study useful things." "That answers the question." A few nervous delegates lowered their eyes to hide sudden smiles. Ethan began walking slowly across the polished floor, hands loosely behind his back. His dress, shoes echoed softly beneath the enormous chamber ceiling while translation drones followed overhead in careful silence. "Humans spent most of our existence trying to survive our own mistakes," he said. "That tends to shape a species." Karetha's expression remained cold. "Your species survives because stronger civilizations allowed it." Ethan stopped walking. "No," he replied quietly. "We survived because every time somebody tried to erase us, we adapted faster than expected." The chamber lights reflected faintly across his gray eyes now. There was no pride in his voice. No anger either. Only fatigue. The kind carried by people who remembered too much history. "Do you know what the first human astronauts carried into space?" Ethan asked. Nobody answered. "Sandwiches." Confused murmurs spread instantly through nearby delegates. Ethan nodded faintly. Tiny little things wrapped in plastic. They floated crumbs into the control panels and nearly caused a system's failure. He looked toward the senators surrounding him. "That is humanity in one story. We climb into impossible machines, risk our lives exploring the stars, and still bring lunch with us." A few uneasy chuckles escaped through the chamber. Even Kareth looked momentarily confused. Ethan continued before anyone could interrupt. "But the second half of the story matters more." His voice softened slightly. "After nearly damaging the mission, humans redesigned the systems, improved the procedures, learned from the mistake." His eyes moved slowly across the chamber. "That is what makes humanity dangerous." Lyra watched the room change again. Delegates were no longer looking at Ethan like an inferior diplomat. They were studying him carefully now, the way civilians studied unstable weather patterns. "We fail constantly," Ethan said, "but we keep learning anyway." Kareth stepped forward again, visibly irritated by the shifting atmosphere around him. "Enough philosophy. Your species stands alone." Ethan looked directly at him. "Humans have stood alone before." Then suddenly every light inside the Senate chamber flickered once. Hard. The gravity engines beneath the station emitted a low mechanical groan that vibrated through the floor like distant thunder. Conversation stopped instantly. A sharp electronic tone echoed across the chamber as emergency tactical systems activated automatically overhead. One by one, massive holographic displays ignited across the domed ceiling in urgent crimson light. Senate Defense Grid Alert. Unknown fleet signature detected. The room went silent again. Ethan Cole glanced up at the warning displays with the same expression a tired man might give unexpected ring. Then he sighed softly under his breath. "Right on schedule," he murmured. The emergency alarms did not sound loud. That was the part Commander Lyra Vane found most disturbing. Instead of screaming sirens or panicked evacuation orders, the Senate chamber filled with a low-pulsing tone designed to preserve composure during catastrophic events. A calm alarm, the kind engineers created for situations too serious for panic. Crimson warning lights rotated silently across the curved ceiling while tactical displays multiplied through the air above the delegates. One after another, senators activated private scanners and long-range sensor feeds through trembling hands. The same message appeared everywhere. Unknown fleet signature detected. No warp entry recorded. No border alerts triggered. Lyra felt her stomach tighten. That was impossible. Modern fleets could not simply appear near Helios Prime undetected. Every jump corridor in the sector was monitored by layered sensor arrays stretching across millions of miles. Entire civilizations had built their military doctrines around early detection systems. But the tactical displays above the chamber showed hundreds of new contacts sitting motionless in orbit beyond the station, waiting, like they had always been there. Supreme General Kareth turned sharply toward one of his officers. "Identify those vessels immediately." The armored Varkal technician worked frantically across a holographic console. Streams of data flooded the air between his claws. "Scanning transponder signatures now," he said. "No matching registry found." Ethan Cole slipped both hands into the pockets of his charcoal slacks and looked toward the tactical displays overhead with mild curiosity. "That cannot be correct," Kareth snapped. "Every fleet leaves a signature." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Most fleets do. The chamber fell quieter still. Another Varkal officer suddenly looked up from a separate sensor feed, his expression visibly pale beneath dark red skin. "General," he said carefully, "the unknown vessels are maintaining complete thermal suppression." Several delegates gasped softly. Lyra closed her eyes for half a second. Stealth fleets. Not theoretical prototypes. Operational ones. Humanity had been developing thermal suppression systems for decades, but most civilizations dismissed the technology as impractical outside espionage operations. Maintaining complete heat masking across capital-class warships required impossible levels of energy management. Impossible for most species. Human engineers, unfortunately, had a habit of treating impossible things like personal insults. Ethan walked slowly toward the transparent observation wall overlooking the storms of Helios Prime. Blue lightning flashed beneath the station again, briefly illuminating the reflection of dozens of crimson warning symbols across the glass. "Humans learned a long time ago," he said quietly, "that the safest weapon is the one nobody notices until it is already in position." Kareth stared at him. "You planned this." Ethan gave a small shrug. "You announced war publicly." Earth responded professionally. One of the merchant delegates suddenly stood from his seat. "How many ships are out there?" Nobody answered immediately. Then the Senate defense grid updated itself automatically. Hundreds of blue tactical icons appeared beyond the station perimeter. More continued arriving every few seconds. Silent, organized, terrifyingly disciplined. Lyra watched the room begin changing from arrogance into calculation. Senators who had laughed at humanity less than 30 minutes earlier were now reviewing emergency alliances and escape corridors through hidden interfaces beneath their desks. Some species reacted to fear emotionally. Others became transactional. Humans somehow became calmer. "This is intimidation," Kareth growled. Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the accusation. "No," he said softly. "Intimidation would have involved speeches." The Varkal commander took another heavy step forward. "You dare threaten the Empire inside the Senate itself?" Ethan turned from the observation wall at last. His expression remained composed, but something colder had entered his eyes now. Not anger. Resolve. "General," he said, "if humanity wanted this chamber threatened, you would not still be holding meetings inside it." Absolute silence followed. Even the translation drones seemed slower now, their soft electronic hum barely audible beneath the distant rumble of Helios Prime storms. Then another alert flashed across the tactical displays overhead. Terran fleet authorization confirmed. Command priority. Titan protocol. Lyra stopped breathing for a moment, because she had seen that phrase before. And judging by the sudden shift in Ethan Cole's expression, the situation had just become far more serious than even he expected. The words Titan protocol hung across the Senate chamber like the arrival of a storm nobody could outrun. Crimson warning symbols rotated slowly above the delegates while tactical officers from half a dozen species scrambled to access restricted databases that suddenly refused to cooperate. The station lights dimmed another fraction as emergency power rerouted toward defense systems buried deep inside the orbital structure. Somewhere beneath the chamber floor, enormous magnetic shielding arrays awakened with a low metallic hum that vibrated through everyone's bones. Ethan Cole stared at the glowing words overhead for several long seconds without speaking. For the first time since the declaration began, Commander Lyra Vane saw something shift behind the human ambassador's calm expression. Not fear. Weariness. The kind carried by people who had spent too many years preparing for outcomes they hoped would never happen. "General," Ethan said quietly, "who authorized orbital escalation?" Kareth folded his arms again, though his confidence no longer looked as effortless as before. "The Empire requires no authorization to defend itself." Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. That was not the question. The chamber had become so quiet now that even small sounds carried unnaturally far. The soft chirping of translation drones. The faint clicking of nervous claws against armrests. The distant rolling thunder beneath Helios Prime's storm layer thousands of feet below the station. Then one of the Senate technicians suddenly looked up from his console, visibly shaken. "Unknown Terran fleet has completed strategic positioning," he announced. "Defense grid predicts total orbital dominance in under 6 minutes." A ripple of alarm spread instantly through the delegates. Several senators began arguing openly, while others activated emergency departure requests through private channels. None of the requests went through. Senate lockdown procedures had already sealed every dock beneath the station. Nobody was leaving. Ethan closed his eyes briefly as if fighting exhaustion instead of panic. Of course they did, he murmured under his breath. Lyra stepped forward carefully from the diplomatic seating rows, drawing surprised looks from nearby officials. Ambassador Cole, she said cautiously, what exactly is Titan Protocol? Ethan looked toward her. The overhead crimson lighting reflected faintly across the silver strands beginning to appear near his temples. For a moment, he seemed older than before, older than the chamber itself somehow. A deterrence policy, he answered quietly. Human governments created it after the Europa secession crisis 82 years ago. Kareth gave a dismissive snort. Another human scare tactic. Ethan's gaze shifted back toward the Varkal commander. No, General. A scare tactic is designed to frighten people. His voice remained calm. Titan Protocol was designed to prevent frightened people from making irreversible decisions. Several delegates exchanged confused looks. Ethan walked slowly back toward the center of the chamber while crimson holograms flickered across his suit. Humanity learned something dangerous during our early centuries, he continued. Fear makes civilizations impulsive. Impulsive civilizations start wars they do not fully understand. Kareth stepped forward again. The Empire understands perfectly. Ethan stopped walking. Then your empire is the first in galactic history. Silence followed that statement. Heavy. Absolute. Lyra studied Ethan carefully now. She finally understood what separated humans from most advanced species. Other civilizations evolved toward stability. Humans evolved toward recovery. They expected disasters, planned for them, built entire systems around surviving worst-case scenarios because history had taught them repeatedly that eventually, something always went wrong. One of the Senate defense officers suddenly interrupted through the chamber intercom. Additional fleet signatures detected. Every tactical display updated instantly. More blue Terran markers appeared beyond the station perimeter, hundreds becoming thousands. Silent formations stretching across orbital space with terrifying precision. No engine trails, another technician whispered. No communications traffic. They are operating completely dark. Ethan glanced toward the growing fleet projections with visible irritation now, almost like a man discovering coworkers had overreacted to a simple disagreement. That is excessive, he muttered quietly. Lyra blinked in disbelief. Excessive. Thousands of stealth warships surrounding the most important diplomatic station in the galaxy, and the human ambassador sounded mildly annoyed. Kareth finally lost patience completely. Enough of these games. His voice thundered through the chamber. You will order your fleet to withdraw immediately. Ethan looked directly into the towering Varkal commander's yellow eyes. Then, very softly, he answered, General, if Earth had sent these ships to attack you, there would not have been enough time for speeches. Nobody in the Senate chamber spoke after that, because deep down, every species present realized the same horrifying truth at exactly the same moment. The human was not threatening them. He was trying very hard not to. The Senate chamber no longer felt like the political center of the galaxy. It felt like the inside of a pressure vessel seconds before rupture. Crimson tactical projections drifted across terrified faces while emergency systems pulsed silently beneath the polished silver floors. Outside the transparent observation wall, the storms over Helios Prime rolled endlessly beneath the station, flashes of blue lightning illuminating distant outlines of Terran warships suspended motionless in orbit. Thousands of them now, dark silhouettes without engine glow, without radio chatter, without movement, waiting with the unnatural stillness of predators that already knew exactly where every exit was located. Ethan Cole stood near the center of the chamber with both hands loosely behind his back. His charcoal suit remained perfectly neat despite the growing chaos surrounding him. Delegates argued in hushed voices across private communication channels, while security personnel rushed between tactical stations along the outer walls. But the human ambassador barely seemed to notice any of it. Commander Lyra Vane noticed instead. She noticed the slight tension near Ethan's jawline, the faint exhaustion settling deeper into his gray eyes each time another Terran fleet marker appeared overhead. He was not pleased by what was happening. That realization frightened her more than the fleet itself. A sharp electronic tone suddenly cut through the chamber. One of the Varkal officers near the tactical platform stiffened visibly while studying an incoming transmission. General, he said carefully, Terran Command Network is requesting direct authorization confirmation. Kareth's expression hardened. Authorization for what? The officer swallowed once before answering. Escalation containment procedures. Several nearby delegates visibly recoiled at the phrase. Ethan closed his eyes briefly and rubbed one hand across his forehead like a tired professor dealing with overenthusiastic students. Wonderful, he muttered quietly. Lyra stepped closer to him before lowering her voice. Ambassador, she asked carefully, what happens if containment fails? Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. Everyone remembers why humans built Titan Protocol in the first place. The way he said it sent cold unease through her chest. Not threatening, not dramatic, just factual, like discussing gravity or weather patterns. Across the chamber floor, Kareth slammed one armored hand against the central tactical console. The impact echoed sharply beneath the dome ceiling. The Empire will not be intimidated by hidden ships and empty warnings. Ethan looked toward him again. General, he said calmly. Humans stopped using empty warnings centuries ago. Another alert appeared overhead instantly afterward. Terran fleet condition updated. Shield systems active. No offensive targeting detected. The chamber paused. Even Kareth frowned slightly while reading the update. Lyra understood the significance immediately. The Terran fleet had surrounded the station completely. Yet not a single targeting lock had been activated. No weapons arrays aimed at the Senate. No offensive posturing. They were defending positions, not attacking them. Ethan noticed her realization. You see it now, he said softly. Lyra nodded slowly. They came to protect you. Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. No, they came to prevent everyone else from making catastrophic decisions. A heavy silence followed. Then another tactical officer suddenly spoke from the upper command balcony. Long-range scans confirm Varkal reinforcement fleets accelerating toward Helios Prime. Panic spread instantly through portions of the chamber. Multiple senators rose from their seats at once, while overlapping voices filled the air again. Kareth finally looked satisfied for the first time in nearly an hour. You see, he declared. The Empire does not retreat. Ethan turned toward the transparent observation wall once more. Blue lightning flashed across his reflection. Thousands of silent Terran warships hovered behind the glass like shadows waiting beneath dark water. That is the problem, Ethan said quietly. Neither do humans. The Senate chamber fell silent again, because everyone suddenly understood the terrible symmetry forming around them. Two civilizations built on endurance. Two species too stubborn to back down publicly. Two military systems now converging around the single, most politically fragile location in the known galaxy. Lyra's pulse quickened as another classified alert appeared briefly across her private wrist console. Titan Protocol Phase 2 pending. Human diplomatic authority required for cancellation. Her eyes widened. Slowly, she turned toward Ethan Cole. The human ambassador was staring out at the storms below with the expression of a man carrying memories too heavy to explain. Then, almost too quietly to hear beneath the hum of the chamber, he whispered to himself, Please do not make me do this again. The storms beneath Helios Prime continued rolling across the planet like dark oceans lit from within. Blue lightning flashed beneath the Senate station every few seconds now, illuminating the silent Terran fleet surrounding the orbital structure from every direction. Thousands of warships hovered in disciplined formation without firing a single engine thruster. No aggressive maneuvers. No weapon locks. Just presence. Calm. Immovable presence. Inside the Senate chamber, the silence had become unbearable. Delegates no longer argued openly. They whispered now. Quiet, frightened whispers traded between species that had spent centuries believing humanity was emotionally unstable, technologically reckless, and politically divided. None of those assumptions matched the reality floating outside the station windows. Commander Lyra Vane stood near Ethan Cole while studying the classified warning still glowing faintly across her wrist console. Titan Protocol Phase 2 pending. She could not stop staring at the final line beneath it. Human diplomatic authority required for cancellation. Not activation. Cancellation. The protocol had already begun before the Senate session even started. Ethan had known. Somehow he had known war was coming before the Varkal Empire officially announced it. How long? Lyra asked softly. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the fleet outside. About 43 minutes before the declaration. Lyra stared at him in disbelief. You positioned an entire hidden fleet around the Senate station in less than an hour. Ethan shook his head faintly. No, his reflection shifted across the glass as another flash of lightning rolled beneath the station. They were already nearby. Lyra felt cold suddenly. Why? Ethan finally looked at her directly. Because humans study patterns. His voice remained calm, but the exhaustion inside it felt ancient now. Empires become predictable when they believe nobody can challenge them. Across the chamber, Supreme General Kareth was receiving rapid tactical updates from multiple officers simultaneously. Even from a distance, the cracks in Varkal confidence had become visible. The towering commander still stood rigidly upright, but his officers no longer looked certain around him. Several kept glancing nervously toward the Terran fleet projections overhead. One of them suddenly approached Kareth and whispered something urgently into his ear. The general's expression darkened immediately. Impossible, he growled. The officer lowered his gaze. The scans are confirmed, sir. Ethan noticed the exchange instantly. Your reinforcements stopped accelerating, he said quietly. Kareth's yellow eyes snapped toward him. Ethan sighed. General, no captain wants to be the first ship entering a battlefield they do not understand. Lyra watched Kareth carefully, then realized something astonishing. The Varkal commander was no longer trying to intimidate Ethan. He was trying to understand him. The entire chamber was. Who are you really? Lyra asked softly. Ethan remained silent for several seconds before answering. A diplomat. That is not what I meant. Another flash of lightning illuminated the chamber. Ethan's reflection stared back from the transparent wall alongside the silent Terran fleet beyond it. 22 years ago, he said quietly, I commanded the Titan Emergency Response Group during the Europa secession crisis. Several nearby delegates turned immediately at the words. Even Kareth froze. Lyra felt her pulse quicken. Everyone in military intelligence knew the Europa crisis. Entire systems had nearly collapsed into open interstellar war before a mysterious Terran commander negotiated simultaneous ceasefires across 3 hostile governments without firing a shot. Historians still argued over how it had been accomplished. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. By the time diplomats arrived, he continued softly. Too many frightened people had already made irreversible decisions. The chamber remained absolutely still. So humanity built Titan Protocol afterward, Lyra whispered. Ethan nodded once. One fleet hidden close enough to respond immediately. One diplomatic authority capable of stopping escalation before panic spreads. Kareth stepped toward him slowly now, no longer towering with arrogance, but with visible caution. You built an entire military doctrine around restraint. Ethan looked genuinely confused by the question. Of course. He glanced around the chamber filled with frightened delegates and trembling tactical projections. What else would responsible species build? Nobody answered. Because in that moment, the galaxy finally understood the terrible secret behind human power. Humanity was dangerous not because they loved war. Humanity was dangerous because they feared it enough to prepare for it better than everyone else. No one officially announced the end of the crisis. There was no dramatic speech. No applause inside the Senate chamber. No victorious anthem echoing across Helios Prime. The galaxy simply felt the tension begin to loosen one careful breath at a time. Above the station, the massive Varkal reinforcement fleets gradually reduced acceleration and shifted into holding patterns beyond the outer defense perimeter. Minutes later, the silent Terran warships responded by easing formation density around the station itself. No celebration followed the maneuver. Only professionalism. Quiet restraint from 2 civilizations standing inches away from disaster. Inside the chamber, the crimson emergency lighting slowly faded back into the normal silver glow of Senate operations. Delegates remained seated in stunned silence, while technicians hurried to stabilize tactical systems still overloaded from the sudden fleet convergence. Some senators looked embarrassed now. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked deeply unsettled by what they had learned about humanity. Supreme General Kareth stood motionless near the central podium for several long moments before finally speaking. The Empire will suspend military escalation pending diplomatic review. The statement sounded heavy coming from him. Expensive somehow. Ethan Cole gave a small nod. Smart decision. Kareth narrowed his yellow eyes slightly. Do humans always answer threats with hidden fleets? Ethan glanced toward the observation wall, where distant Terran warships still hovered silently against the stormlit darkness. No, he replied. Sometimes we answer with paperwork. A few exhausted laughs escaped around the chamber before anyone could stop them. Even Kareth looked momentarily unsure whether the human was joking again. Commander Lyra Vane noticed something then. Throughout the entire confrontation, Ethan had never once sounded proud of humanity's military strength. He sounded tired of needing it. That distinction changed everything. The Senate lockdown lifted several minutes later with a soft electronic chime echoing through the chamber. Docking bays reopened. Emergency systems powered down. Translation drones resumed their normal patrol routes overhead, while delegates slowly began leaving their seats in cautious silence. Nobody rushed toward the exits anymore. The panic had burned itself out. Ethan finally returned to the Terran delegation table, where his abandoned lunch still sat untouched beneath the soft chamber lights. The steak had gone completely cold. He stared at it for a second before sighing quietly. That is disappointing. Lyra walked toward him carefully through the thinning crowd. Up close, the human ambassador looked older than before. The calm remained, but now she could see the weight underneath it. The endless calculations. The responsibility. You really were planning to finish lunch during a galactic crisis, she said softly. Ethan pulled out his chair again. Commander, if humanity stopped eating every time somebody threatened us, we would all starve to death. Lyra laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised both of them. Ethan looked up at her with faint amusement. There it is, he said. First genuine laugh in the chamber all day. Outside the observation wall, Helios Prime's storms finally began calming beneath the station. The endless blue lightning faded into softer flashes across the clouds far below. Ethan cut into the cold steak anyway with complete indifference. Lyra tilted her head slightly. Humans really will eat anything cold, will not they? Ethan pointed the fork at her with mock seriousness. That attitude is exactly why nobody invites your species to barbecues. Another small laugh escaped her. Easier this time. Around them, senators and military officers continued leaving the chamber while pretending not to watch the human ambassador and the Thalary commander talking beside the massive observation wall. Ethan took another bite of the ruined lunch and grimaced faintly. Okay, he admitted. This is terrible now. Lyra folded her arms behind her back, violet eyes reflecting the distant Terran fleet outside. There is a cafe on the lower diplomatic deck, she said carefully. I am told they serve acceptable coffee. Ethan looked at her for a moment, then toward the silent warships slowly departing orbit beyond the storms. Finally back toward her again. Commander, he said with a tired smile. After today, acceptable sounds perfect. Together they walked toward the chamber